So welcome to this video on bacteria. We've been talking about bacteria and conditions that are best suited for bacterial growth. Today we're going to focus on one aspect of that bacterial growth, and that's going to be temperature. So why is temperature important? Why do we need to study temperature and its effect on bacterial growth? Well, we want to study that because we want to figure out ways to prevent bacterial growth. So when we look at temperature, the first thing I want you to think about is degrees Celsius. We in the U.S. are more familiar with Fahrenheit, but in terms of scientific applications, research applications, and really worldwide applications, the preferred use is going to be degrees Celsius. So to kind of acclimate you to that, I want you to think about the freezing point in Fahrenheit. Here in the U.S., we're familiar with 32 degrees Fahrenheit being freezing point, but in terms of Celsius, it's going to be around 0 degrees Celsius. When we're thinking about room temperature, typically it's going to be anywhere from 68 to 72, 74 degrees Fahrenheit. In Celsius, it's going to be around 25 degrees. Think about body temp, 98.6 Fahrenheit, it's going to be the equivalent of 37 degrees Celsius. And then finally, the boiling point, 100 degrees Celsius is actually about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. But again, everything here is going to be on Celsius. And so with this graph, I've started with the y-axis, and this is going to be our rate of growth. And then our x-axis is going to be temperature. Again, temperature in degrees Celsius. So when we're thinking about temperature and we're thinking about bacteria, certain bacteria have certain temperature preferences in terms of growth. And we're going to have sort of a minimum temperature and a maximum temperature. So there's going to be a range, and I want you to think about that. We can actually categorize bacteria into 5 main categories when we're thinking about temperature. So we're going to start off with the very first one, and that is going to be your psychrophiles. So let me write that here on the board. So we have our there's an R, psychrophiles. And these psychrophiles, they are going to grow best in very, very extremely cold conditions. I have the range here at -10 to about 20 degrees Celsius. I have actually seen it go even lower to about -20. The ideal range for maximum growth is going to be somewhere between 0 to 10 degrees Celsius. So these are going to be in the polar regions, the North Pole, the South Pole, and in the deep ocean water regions where it's really, really, really cold. The next one that we want to consider are going to be the psychotropes. So I'm going to write that up here. We have our psychotropes. So as temperatures start to get a little warmer, so there are our psychotropes, you're going to be seeing the rate of growth somewhere between 0 to 30 degrees Celsius, with the maximum, I would say, landing somewhere between 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. And in this situation, think about food that you've put in the refrigerator. You've left it in there for several weeks and it starts to develop some type of mold or some type of bacteria growth. Those are the types of bacteria that are going to thrive in those refrigerated conditions somewhere between 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. As we bump up the temperature a little bit and we get that temperature somewhere between the 10 to 50 degrees Celsius range, then you're going to have bacteria that are going to fall into the mesophile category. So M-E-S-O, mesophile. And those mesophiles are going to be the types of bacteria that you want to think about when you consider food spoiling. So think about yogurts and cheese, dairy products that maybe you leave sitting out for an extended period of time. Think about going to a family picnic or a church barbecue and they've got that potato salad that has all that mayonnaise in it and it sits out for hours and hours. That's a perfect situation for these mesophiles to begin to grow. So think about that before you dip into that potato salad. The ideal range is probably going to be 20 to 40 degrees Celsius for maximum growth, but it can start down somewhere between 10 and all the way up to 50. The next category, as we get slightly warmer, it's going to be the thermophiles. And the ideal range for thermophiles is going to be somewhere between, I would say, 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. And then finally, when we get into those extremely hot conditions, you're going to have the hyperthermophiles. And with the hyperthermophiles, these are going to be bacteria that you'll find growing in potentially hot springs and actually deep into the ocean. Below that cold surface, there are vents that run even further down to those underwater volcanic areas. That's going to be extremely hot temperatures, and that's where you'll find that type of bacteria growing. So I want you to think about bacterial growth in terms of temperature and sort of understand which category that bacteria might fall into based off of the temperature. But remember, temperature is not the only thing that we want to consider when we're talking about bacterial growth. You also want to think about pH. Sometimes certain bacteria will grow better in a more acidic environment, while others will grow better in a more basic environment. And then you also want to think about nutrition as well, or nutrients. Some bacteria can only grow in the presence of oxygen. Some bacteria find that oxygen to be toxic and cannot grow within the presence of oxygen. Nitrogen is another type of nutrient that might be needed. Sulfur, carbon dioxide, those are just some examples. So there's all sorts of factors that kind of come into play when we're looking at bacterial growth. But the first thing I want you to remember is temperature, and make sure you understand these.